Have you ever stopped to wonder if your reality is truly yours? If your most intimate perceptions, your deepest fears, your most secret desires are genuinely yours? Or have they been carefully planted in you by invisible forces that manipulate your very existence? Prepare to have your soul shaken to its foundations, because today we're diving into the most disturbing and liberating philosophical abyss humanity has ever known. Michel Foucault, the French thinker who unmasked the hidden structures of power, is about to shatter all your certainties. Imagine discovering that everything you consider most natural about yourself is, in fact, an artificial construction. That your personality has been molded like clay in the hands of an invisible potter. That your tastes, your aversions, even the way you perceive your own body have been programmed into you through mechanisms so subtle that you mistake them for your own nature. This isn't science fiction. This is the naked, raw reality that Foucault forces us to face. Foucault wasn't just a philosopher, he was an archaeologist of the human soul. He lived between 1926 and 1984, but his ideas echo today with an urgency that cuts like a blade through our contemporary illusions. In an era of fake news, identity crisis, and digital surveillance, Foucault emerges as the prophet who predicted our golden prison. What we take as natural is historical, Foucault whispers to us, and these words should make your blood freeze, because they mean that absolutely nothing you consider fundamental about your existence is carved in stone. Everything can be questioned, transformed, and revealed as a carefully constructed illusion. Your perception is not neutral, not innocent, not yours. It's a historical and social construction, a product of power relations and knowledge systems that operate through you without you even realizing it. Today, we're going to unveil the deepest secrets of human manipulation through 4 revelations that will forever transform how you see the world. The power-knowledge complex that controls your mind, the discourses that create your reality, the surveillance mechanisms that shape your self-perception, and finally, the devastating truth about how you were constituted as a subject. Prepare for the most disturbing journey of your life. Foucault's first revelation is so shocking it might make you question every thought you've ever had. Power is not what you imagine. Forget the image of the tyrant with an iron fist. Modern power is infinitely more sinister because it's invisible, productive, and seductive. It doesn't oppress you, it creates you. Power is not something one possesses, it is something one exercises, Foucault reveals to us, and this phrase should echo in your mind like an alarm. Think for a moment about how you understand your own body. You believe you know when you're sick, when you're healthy, when you're normal or abnormal. But this truth about yourself has been constructed by a complex medical power knowledge apparatus that defines, categorizes, and controls your bodily existence. The doctor doesn't simply discover your illness. He produces it through diagnoses, examinations, categories that transform vague sensations into specific pathologies. Modern medicine isn't just neutral science. It's a power device that creates the sick, the healthy, the normal, and the pathological. But this goes far beyond medicine. Think about the evolution of madness. In the Middle Ages, the madman was seen as possessed. In the 18th century, he came to be perceived as an irrational animal. In the 19th century, he became a mental patient. Each era created its own truth about madness, and each of these truths shaped not only how society treated the mad, but how the mad themselves perceived themselves. There is no knowledge without power, nor power without knowledge, Foucault warns us, and here is the heart of the first great revelation. The knowledge you possess about yourself, about the world, about what is right and wrong is not pure knowledge. It's knowledge crossed by power, shaped by interests, constructed to serve purposes that go far beyond the simple search for truth. The judicial system is another devastating example. How we perceive crime and the criminal has been radically transformed not just by humanitarian concerns, but by a new form of power that disciplines the soul, not just the body. Foucault's second revelation is even more disturbing. You don't think with your own words. Discourses, these sets of rules and practices that organize what can be said, thought, and perceived, are not just tools you use to express yourself. They are the invisible structures that create your very reality. Discourse is not simply that which translates struggles or systems of domination, but that for which, by which, there is struggle, the power which one is trying to seize, Foucault reveals to us. Take sexuality as an example. You probably believe that the Victorian era repressed sexuality. But Foucault destroys this comfortable illusion. The 19th century didn't repress sexuality, it produced it through an unprecedented discursive explosion. Doctors, psychiatrists, moralists, educators all began to speak obsessively about sex, creating categories, classifications, and norms that didn't exist before. It was during this period that the categories of homosexual and heterosexual were born. Before this, there were sexual acts, but not fixed sexual identities. Medical psychiatric discourse created the homosexual as a species of person. And by creating this category, discourse also created its opposite, the normal heterosexual. Your own sexual identity, what you consider most intimate and personal about yourself, was produced by specific historical discourses. But discourses don't just create sexual categories. They create entire objects of knowledge and experience. The very idea of childhood as a distinct phase of life with specific characteristics and particular needs is a relatively recent discursive construction. Before the 18th century, children were seen simply as miniature adults. It was the emergence of pedagogical and psychological discourses about childhood that created the modern child. The most disturbing aspect is that by creating these categories, discourses don't simply describe reality, they produce it. When psychiatric discourse creates the category of the sexual pervert, it's not simply naming something that already existed. It's creating a new way of being human, with all the implications this brings for those who are classified this way. The third revelation cuts even deeper into your sense of autonomy. You are being watched, constantly, and the most terrifying part is that you've learned to watch yourself. Foucault discovered something revolutionary about modern power. It doesn't need to constantly repress you because it has taught you to repress yourself. Visibility is a trap, he warns us, and nowhere is this more evident than in his analysis of the panopticon. The panopticon was Jeremy Bentham's design for the perfect prison, a circular building with a central watchtower from which a guard could observe all the prisoners without being seen himself. The genius and terror of this design is that prisoners never know when they're being watched, so they must assume they're always being watched. This uncertainty forces them to regulate their own behavior constantly, making external control unnecessary. But here's Foucault's devastating insight. Our entire society has become a giant panopticon. You are simultaneously the prisoner and the guard of yourself. Think about how many times today you modified your behavior because someone might be watching. I'm not just talking about security cameras or social media. I'm talking about that internal voice that constantly judges you, that tells you how you should act, think, feel. Modern disciplinary power operates through what Foucault calls normalization. It doesn't work by forbidding certain behaviors. It works by creating norms and then making you internalize the desire to conform to those norms. You police yourself more effectively than any external authority ever could, because you've internalized the surveillance apparatus into your very being. Look at how schools operate. They teach you to be a particular kind of person. The bells that regulate your time, the grades that rank your performance, the constant evaluation and comparison with others, all of this shapes you into a docile and useful subject. You learn to wake up, to sit still, to compete, to seek approval. These are all technologies of the self that mold your subjectivity. And in our digital age, this surveillance has reached unprecedented levels. Your online behavior is constantly monitored, analyzed, and used to create profiles that predict and influence your future actions. Every click, every search, every pause as you scroll feeds data into algorithms that know you better than you know yourself. The most insidious part is that you've been taught to desire this surveillance, to voluntarily share your most intimate thoughts and experiences. The panopticon is a machine for disassociating the see being seen dyad, Foucault reveals. And suddenly you realize you live in constant performance even when you're alone. You've internalized the gaze of the other so completely that you've become your own jailer. When was the last time you did something purely because you wanted to, without worrying about judgments, expectations, or social consequences? The fourth and most devastating revelation concerns yourself, your constitution as a subject. You probably believe that you were born as an individual with inherent characteristics, which you've gradually discovered and expressed. But Foucault reveals the terrible truth. You were not born a subject, you were made into one. The individual is not given over and against power, he tells us. The individual, with his identity and characteristics, is the product of a relation of power exercised over bodies, multiplicities, movements, desires, forces. This means that your sense of having a unified, coherent identity, your feeling of being a self, is not natural. It's the result of specific historical practices and techniques of subjectification. Think about how you learned to be yourself. Through what Foucault calls technologies of the self, practices like diary writing, self-examination, therapy, meditation, even social media posting, you've been trained to create and maintain a coherent sense of self. But this self isn't discovered, it is produced through these practices. The examination is perhaps the most powerful technology of subjectification in modern society. From school tests to medical checkups, from job interviews to psychological assessments, examinations don't just measure pre-existing qualities. They create the subjects they claim to evaluate. When you take a personality test, you're not revealing your true personality. You're participating in the production of a particular kind of psychological subject. We are subjects of knowledge, objects of power, and subjects of our own ethical construction, Foucault explains. And this triple bind reveals the complexity of our situation. We experience ourselves as knowing subjects who can understand and control our lives, but we're simultaneously objects being shaped by power relations, and we're also engaged in the ongoing project of constructing ourselves as ethical beings. This is why Foucault's work is so liberating, even as it's terrifying. By showing us how we've been constructed, he opens up the possibility of reconstructing ourselves differently. The target nowadays is not to discover what we are, but to refuse what we are, he challenges us. This isn't about finding your true self buried beneath social conditioning. It's about recognizing that there is no true self to find, and therefore you have the freedom to create yourself anew. Foucault's genealogy doesn't reveal hidden truths. It shows how our truths have been historically constructed. When you understand that your deepest beliefs about yourself, your body, your desires, your identity have been produced through specific historical practices, you gain the critical distance necessary to question them. The role of philosophy is not to discover what is hidden, but to make visible what is precisely visible, Foucault instructs us. The power relations that shape your life aren't secret. They're right there in front of you, operating so openly that you've become blind to them. This is the perception revolution Foucault offers, to develop a permanent attitude of critique toward all truths, including the ones that feel most natural and necessary. Critique is the movement by which the subject gives himself the right to question truth on its effects of power and question power on its discourses of truth, he explains. This means examining every institution that claims authority over your life, medical, legal, educational, religious, economic, and asking not whether their truths are correct, but how their truths function as instruments of power. What kinds of subjects do they create? What possibilities do they foreclose? But the deepest level of this critique must be applied to yourself. Every time you feel certain about who you are, what you want, what you believe, Foucault challenges you to ask, how did I come to be the kind of person who could feel this certainty? What power relations have shaped this feeling? What other ways of being does this certainty make impossible for me? This isn't a recipe for paralysis or relativism. It's an invitation to what Foucault calls the aesthetics of existence. The idea that you can make your life into a work of art by consciously shaping yourself rather than simply accepting the shape that power relations have given you. The main interest in life and work is to become someone else that you were not in the beginning, he suggests. The revolution begins now, in this moment, with this question: who are you choosing to become? Not who you are, but who you are becoming. Because for Foucault, and for anyone who takes his challenge seriously, identity is not a destination, but a journey. Not a discovery, but a creation. Not a truth to be found, but a work of art to be made. The canvas is your life. The brushes are your choices. The masterpiece is who you become when you finally refuse to be who power told you to be. Are you ready to begin?